On Overdrive this week, Bert drives the all-new Range Rover Sport and you wouldn't believe where he's been with it. Your queries answered by Bert on Auto Selector. And all the latest in our motoring news section. Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I'm Shireen Bhan. Land Rover shut down Manhattan so that Daniel Craig, better known as James Bond, could get enough space to reveal his latest toy. We are talking about the Range Rover Sport, our very own James Bond. Bert got a chance to check out what the fuss was all about in Wales. Take a look.
Big old country house, massive grounds and a Range Rover. Typical English setting, isn't it? But then if you look closely at this vehicle, it isn't your standard Range Rover. No, this is the 2013 Range Rover Sport and it's coming down to India by the festive season. Now, the term SUV, well, it's a bit of a misnomer. It stands for Sport Utility Vehicle. But then how many SUVs out there do you know of that are actually sporty? But Range Rover now intends to address that issue with the Range Rover Sport. What I'm here to find out is just exactly how much sportier is the Sport compared to the standard Range Rover.
But first, let's start with the styling, which is remarkably different from the conventional Range Rover on which the Sport is based. This is because the Sport is inspired by the Evoque and derives several of its design cues from that very stylish SUV. Rolled in with the Range Rover's size and presence, this makes the Sport a handsome SUV. Its large surfaces, bristling with taut lines and articulate details, scream for attention. The sloping roofline is an immediate indicator of the Evoque's influence, as is the rear, especially with that beefed up bumper, narrow windscreen and accentuated hatch. Undoubtedly, this is the best looking member of the Range Rover family.
The interiors of the Range Rover Sport, well, they're nice. They derive a lot of its inspiration from the Range Rover, so you'd see a lot of similar bits, but it doesn't have the opulence of the Range Rover. In that sense, this is a fairly subdued interior. Now, you can spec whatever trim levels you want, so you can choose to go fancy and mix and match the upholstery or certain elements on the dashboard. But as standard, well, it's just a plain grey dashboard with some plastic and aluminium bits thrown in. The Range Rover Sport's wheelbase has increased by 178 mm compared to its predecessor, but yet it still feels like a fairly compact SUV, and that's probably because of the design. It derives a lot of its design cues from the Evoque. So it's got the roof lines low, and while it makes the windows look smaller towards the rear, nonetheless, this is still a fairly large SUV, and that means you can seat 7 people inside here. This is every bit a 7-seater SUV. The Range Rover Sport coming down to India will be available with 2 engine options, a petrol and a diesel. Undoubtedly, the diesel will be the more popular choice. It's the 3-litre V6 diesel, which makes 292 horsepower with 600 Newton meters of max torque. But if you want the true Range Rover Sport pedigree, then it's the V8 supercharged petrol that you should invest in, because you get 510 horsepower with 625 Newton meters of max torque. Now, along with the dynamic package, this SUV is capable of doing 100 kilometers per hour in just about 5 seconds. That is proper sport territory.
Both engine options are already available in India. However, where the diesel is concerned, the Sport will get the more powerful diesel. Whereas, what is sold in India in the Range Rover is the 258 PS V6. Nonetheless, both these engines are mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and of course, you get Sport mode just by shifting the gear selector to the left. This essentially tightens up the engine responses by altering the shift points. You also get paddles behind the steering wheel in both diesel and petrol variants. But the performance of the automatic transmission, well, it's not too bad in the diesel, but it's the petrol that really brings out the brilliance of this box.
I'm not entirely convinced that the Range Rover Sport needed a diesel option at all. I think it should have just stuck with the petrol. And and probably given the more horsepower rated petrol for that matter. The supercharged V8 valve does a fantastic job. Because of course, this is a sport SUV, this is supposed to be a sportier SUV, and the diesels, well, they're efficient and they're eco-friendly and all that, and I just find it pretty odd to see an eco button on an SUV that's, well, dubbed the sportier version. Most of the Range Rover Sport isn't a very difficult SUV to drive around urban areas. The steering is reasonably light, and visually, though you might sense that there's a lot of width to this car, it still is fairly easy and convenient to potter about slowly, even if it's in crowded areas, small narrow lanes. Definitely a lot easier to drive than the Range Rover.
Part of that simplicity comes by way of being able to get a closer look at the edges of the Range Rover Sport, unlike the Range Rover where the hood just seems like a massive expanse of metal reaching out into the horizon. The other aspect enhancing drivability is the new electronic assistance on the Range Rover Sport steering. Now, like most electronic systems, it doesn't give you enough feedback, neither does it feel as dynamic as the Porsche Cayenne GTS or the Turbo, or even for that matter the new Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT, which I recently drove at the Circuit of the Americas. But it's light enough at pedestrian speeds and nicely weighs up as those speeds increase. Which brings me to the on-road dynamics of this SUV.
For a sports version, the Range Rover Sport, well, the handling still isn't up to the mark where I'd like it to be. You want the suspension to be a bit stiffer, you want less body roll, you want more accurate dynamics. And well, unfortunately, the Range Rover Sport still isn't there as yet. So essentially, what this is a more affordable Range Rover. So you still get all those luxury and comfort elements. You still get a soft, nice, plush ride. But it's just that the handling department, well, I wish Range Rover, Land Rover had dialed in a bit more into this equation.
But set aside the handling or the lack of sharpness the suspension possesses, and let's focus on the ride quality. The Range Rover Sport is better at the latter than the former. I quite like the ride quality on the Range Rover Sport. Now, it's nowhere near what the Range Rover offers in terms of plushness, but then you have to remember that the Range Rover is a full-fledged luxury SUV. And the Sport, well, the dampers are stiffer. So essentially what you get is a slightly stiffer ride quality. Nevertheless, the occupants inside this cabin will always be isolated from the road surface. You just won't feel a thing.
When this SUV comes down to India, the 21 inches that are standard fitment for the European markets, well, India will get the 19 inches as standard equipment. But the advantage that provides is, thanks to the high profile tires on those wheels, you will get better ride quality as well.
Overall though, what you get in the Sport is a lot of technology that has been upgraded compared to its predecessor. The body and chassis are 33% lighter thanks to the all-aluminium architecture. The suspension stiffness has gone up by 25%. The suspension is lighter with variable dampers, and you get torque vectoring with faster acting control systems and dynamic active rear locking differential. So essentially, the Range Rover Sport is a highly safe, well-mannered and composed vehicle to drive at speed.
So what we're now going to do is move from tarmac onto the off-road section and see just how well the Range Rover Sport behaves, well, off-road.
Well, there's more Range Rover Sport after this quick break. Bert puts its dynamic abilities to test.